At 37,000 feet over the Mediterranean, EgyptAir Flight 804 was gliding smoothly through the night. Passengers slept, the crew carried out their routine checks, and Paris slowly faded into the distance as Cairo beckoned ahead. Then, in an instant, everything changed. No distress call, no warning. Just a chilling silence as the Airbus A320 vanished from radar. Moments before its disappearance, automated messages hinted at something terrifying. Smoke in the avionics bay, fire in the lavatory, alarms blaring. But before anyone could make sense of it, the plane plunged into the sea, taking 66 souls with it. For weeks, investigators scoured the Mediterranean, piecing together the wreckage, desperate to uncover what went wrong. But when the answers finally surfaced, they only deepened the mystery. Was it a catastrophic mechanical failure? A deadly fire sparked by a simple malfunction, or something far more sinister? Tonight, we uncover the final moments of Flight 804 and the battle over its true cause, a controversy that continues to divide investigators to this day. A late-night flight bound for Cairo glides at 37,000 feet over Greece. The atmosphere in the cockpit is calm, with routine checks being conducted and light-hearted exchanges between the pilots. Captain Mohammed Shoukair, recently promoted, is at the helm, having accumulated over 6,000 hours of flight experience. This promotion marks a milestone in his career, a goal every aviator aspires to reach. Seated beside him is First Officer Mohammed Assem, a young and ambitious pilot with 27 hours of flying time. In Egypt, being a pilot is one of the most prestigious professions in North Africa, and both men take pride in their roles. The flight is a routine one, with an experienced crew and a well-trained pair of pilots overseeing an Airbus A320, one of the most advanced and reliable aircraft in the aviation industry. On board are 56 international passengers, including Egyptians, French, British, and Canadians. The cabin crew, consisting of 5 members, is experiencing a quieter night than usual, as the plane is only half full. In the cockpit, the pilots request coffee, exchanging small talk as they prepare for the long journey ahead. EgyptAir Flight 804 has been airborne for 2.5 hours since departing from Paris. The aircraft is cruising smoothly, and Greek air traffic controllers oversee its passage through their airspace. Routine communications take place, with Captain Shoukair confirming the flight's status. The Greek controller acknowledges the transmission, instructing them to maintain altitude and heading as they prepare to hand the aircraft off to Egyptian airspace. As the flight transitions from Greek to Egyptian airspace, the controller instructs the pilots to contact Cairo Center on a new frequency. However, the pilots do not respond. Initially, this silence is not alarming. Perhaps they are engaged in a discussion or momentarily distracted. But when the call is repeated and still no reply comes, unease sets in. By the third call, the situation becomes concerning. Something is wrong. Moments later, Flight 804 vanishes from radar. The Greek controller reaches out to Cairo, asking if they have made contact with the flight. The response is chilling. There has been no contact, and the aircraft is no longer visible on radar. Minutes pass with no word from the pilots. The scheduled arrival time in Cairo comes and goes, but Flight 804 never lands. In aviation, accidents typically occur during takeoff or landing, often involving controlled flight into terrain. At a cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, however, catastrophic failures are rare. The sudden disappearance of Flight 804 is an unsettling mystery. As dawn breaks, a multinational search effort is launched. Egyptian, French, and Greek ships and aircraft scour the waters north of the Egyptian coast, searching for any sign of the missing plane. Then, breaking news spreads across media outlets. EgyptAir Flight 804, carrying 58 people, has disappeared. Families of passengers gather at Cairo Airport, desperate for updates, clinging to hope that their loved ones may still be safe. A day after the aircraft's disappearance, search teams locate debris from the plane. The discovery confirms the worst fears. Flight 804 has met a tragic fate. Meanwhile, in Europe, the aviation world grapples with the grim reality of yet another air disaster. The tragedy of Flight 804 unfolded against a backdrop of global tension, with Europe already on high alert following a series of terrorist attacks in France, Belgium, and other regions. The possibility that this was yet another act of sabotage quickly became a pressing question in Paris. Was the aircraft deliberately brought down? Investigators scrambled for answers, but with no survivors found, the mystery deepened. The crash of Flight 804 prompted an immediate investigation. 66 people were feared dead, and time was slipping away. The case fell under the jurisdiction of the Egyptian Civil Aviation Authority, but French investigators from the Bureau of Investigation and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, BEA, were also involved, given that the A320 was built in Europe and had French nationals on board. Despite the urgency, information remained scarce. The aircraft had been cruising at altitude before suddenly vanishing. This was now a global news event, and with the world's eyes watching, the pressure on investigators intensified. Yet, they remained committed to a methodical, step-by-step approach. Search teams faced significant challenges. The ocean currents could scatter debris hundreds of kilometers from the point of impact. Satellite images, however, provided a crucial lead, an oil slick on the water. If this slick was linked to the aircraft, it could help pinpoint the wreckage on the ocean floor. The deeper the search area, the more complex the operation. With the site lying at nearly 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet below the surface, sophisticated underwater technology was necessary. BEA-led dive teams deployed sonar-equipped ships to detect the black box pingers. Underwater searches, while slow, allowed for a controlled and thorough examination of the wreckage rather than a chaotic collection of scattered remains. The process was painstakingly slow, but it was the only way to piece together the final moments of Flight 804. Meanwhile, onshore investigations moved forward. The aircraft had been passing through Greek airspace, and investigators turned to air traffic controllers for insight. The Greek controller who last communicated with the flight described a routine interaction, no distress signals, no emergency calls. The crew had spoken in a calm manner, and just moments later, the plane was gone. The abrupt silence was inexplicable. Had there been a malfunction, or was this an act of terrorism? To reconstruct the aircraft's trajectory, investigators analyzed radar and satellite data. What they found was alarming. After losing contact, Flight 804 veered left, then right, before spiraling downward at high speed until it crashed into the sea. A controlled descent would have aimed toward the nearest airport, yet this erratic pattern suggested something else. Was there a mechanical failure that disabled the controls? If so, why hadn't the crew reported it? More disturbingly, the spiral descent was characteristic of an aircraft left completely unattended, neither under pilot control nor on autopilot. What could have prevented the crew from responding? With these troubling questions looming, investigators pinned their hopes on one final clue: the aircraft's black boxes. If recovered from the depths of the ocean, they might hold the key to solving the mystery of Flight 804. At nearly 10,000 feet underwater, the search for the missing aircraft was entering one of the most challenging phases. The deep-sea environment, with its immense pressure and inky darkness, made the task of locating the black boxes incredibly difficult. To aid in the search, a surface vessel deployed hydrophones, scanning the vast ocean for a specific frequency, a distinct ping emitted by the flight recorders. If the transmitter was not buried beneath wreckage or the ocean floor, it could be detected from a considerable distance. Time, however, was not on the investigators' side. The pingers on the black boxes had only 30 days' worth of battery power, turning the mission into a desperate race against time. 2 weeks into the search, the breakthrough finally came. A frequency matching the black box pingers was detected. Excitement surged through the team. If this was truly the signal they had been hoping for, they were finally closing in on the aircraft's final resting place. With precision and urgency, the team deployed a remotely operated submarine equipped with cameras and robotic arms to confirm the discovery. The technicians carefully maneuvered the submersible, controlling it through a tether that extended from the ship. All eyes were fixed on the screen as the vehicle descended into the depths, scanning for any sign of wreckage. Moments later, the first unmistakable shape of the aircraft came into view. The wreckage had been found, but the search was far from over. Now, the crucial task was to locate the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, the key pieces of evidence that could unravel the mystery behind the crash. Using the submarine's robotic arms, the team carefully extracted the black boxes, treating them like gold. To retrieve such vital evidence from the freezing, pitch-black depths of the ocean was nothing short of extraordinary. Back on land, investigators in Egypt meticulously analyzed the debris field mapped from the underwater footage. The wreckage appeared to be contained within a relatively small area, suggesting that the plane had not exploded midair. Had it done so, the debris would have been scattered over a much larger distance. Instead, the evidence pointed to a catastrophic impact with the water while the aircraft was still intact. This revelation led to an unsettling question. If the plane had remained intact throughout its 37,000-foot descent, why had the pilots not communicated with air traffic control? In aviation, there is a well-known protocol. During an emergency, pilots must first aviate, then navigate, and only lastly communicate. The cockpit voice recorder would be crucial in determining what had happened in those final moments. As investigators reviewed the data, a chilling possibility emerged. Could this have been an intentional act? History had seen rare cases where pilots deliberately crashed their planes. Just 10 months earlier, a Germanwings pilot had intentionally flown an Airbus into the French Alps, killing all 150 people on board. But something about this case felt different. The flight path suggested a loss of control rather than a deliberate act. The mystery deepened. How had a routine flight spiraled into disaster? A breakthrough came when investigators obtained a full list of transmissions from the aircraft's ACARS, Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. This digital data link sent short messages from the plane to ground stations via satellite. Among the transmissions, 7 messages stood out, each sent within a brief 3-minute window. The messages, which initially seemed minor, quickly revealed a troubling pattern. It all started on the right side of the cockpit. The first warning indicated an issue with the anti-icing system on the right window. Moments later, another message flagged a problem with the same area. As the data continued to unfold, it became clear that something was happening near the cockpit's right windshield. But what exactly had gone wrong? The answer lay buried within the remaining data, a truth waiting to be uncovered. The sliding window system was primarily designed to regulate its own temperature, ensuring that heating elements maintained optimal conditions. However, a third warning soon emerged: smoke in the lavatory. This was followed by an even more alarming discovery. Smoke had also infiltrated the avionics bay. The situation escalated rapidly. The avionics bay housed critical flight computers, and smoke in this area could lead to catastrophic consequences. Within minutes of the first smoke warning, the pilots realized that their primary flight controls were failing. A problem with the SEC, spoiler and elevator computer, had arisen, threatening the aircraft's ability to manage pitch and roll. If the crew understood the implications, they would have recognized yet another sign that something was severely wrong within the avionics bay. The failing flight controls likely explained the aircraft's slow, spiraling descent. Despite the dire circumstances, the Airbus A320 was equipped with a redundant flight control system. In the event of a failure, the backup system was supposed to maintain enough control to guide the aircraft safely back to base. However, there were no warning signs from the backup flight control computers, leaving investigators to rely on ACARS messages for clues. The data confirmed that Flight 8804 was in grave danger in its final moments. All signs pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion: a fire at the front of the plane. Fire on board an aircraft is one of the most dreaded emergencies. It spreads rapidly, causing extensive damage to critical systems. After analyzing the ACARS warnings, investigators were faced with unsettling possibilities. Perhaps the pilots had been too preoccupied battling the flames to call air traffic control. In such a scenario, extinguishing the fire was paramount. Its unchecked spread could doom the entire aircraft. With growing urgency, investigators sought to determine the fire's exact point of origin. The entire purpose of their work was to prevent a similar tragedy from occurring again. To uncover more about the blaze, they turned to the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, hoping it would provide crucial insights. Audio analysis soon yielded a chilling discovery. The crew had clearly stated the word fire. This was undeniable evidence that an active, uncontrollable blaze had broken out on board. Egyptian investigators relayed their findings to France's Bureau of Investigation and Analysis, BEA. The evidence was overwhelming. The pilots had confirmed the presence of a fire. The next question loomed large. Where had the fire originated? Despite their best efforts, investigators had no definitive answer. 7 months into the international probe, aided by the BEA, the Egyptian government made a dramatic announcement to the media. Officials suggested that sabotage, possibly involving an explosive device, had brought down Flight 804. The claim had major implications. If an act of terrorism was responsible, the investigation would no longer fall under aviation authorities, but rather the jurisdiction of Egypt's state prosecutor. The case was now beyond the control of air safety experts. Egyptian officials put forth the theory that an onboard explosion had occurred, a possibility that could not be ignored. However, without presenting solid forensic evidence, skepticism grew. International investigators pressed for transparency. Could they examine Egypt's forensic report? The response was evasive. The case was now in the hands of state authorities, and critical findings were no longer accessible to aviation experts. Doubts persisted. Could the explosion theory be a false positive? With crucial evidence locked away, many questions remained unanswered, leaving the fate of Flight 84 shrouded in uncertainty. The tests were conclusive. Despite their best efforts, both the BEA and Airbus had been ignored. They had repeatedly offered their assistance, emphasizing their willingness to help, yet their voices went unheard. The refusal to engage with their findings went against the very principles of international aviation cooperation, agreements that nations around the world had long upheld. In Milan, Italy, aviation journalist Leo Burberry closely followed the case. The Egyptian investigators had put forth a theory of an onboard explosion caused by a terrorist attack. However, when pressed for evidence, they failed to provide any. This lack of substantiation was met with widespread skepticism within the aviation community. The question remained, was their chemical residue consistent with an explosive? If a bomb had indeed been responsible, why had no group come forward to claim responsibility? The very purpose of such an attack would have been to send a message, yet there was only silence. It made the entire bombing theory seem not just unlikely, but almost pointless. French air accident investigators from the BEA conducted their own independent analysis, focusing on the possibility of terrorism. They tested materials recovered from the crash for any traces of explosive residue. The results were clear, negative. No evidence supported the bomb theory. The findings directly contradicted the Egyptian authorities' claims, further deepening suspicions about their investigation. Determined to uncover the truth, BEA investigators turned their attention elsewhere. If an explosion had not caused the crash, then what had? They began searching for the source of a fire, one they were convinced had ripped through Flight 804. They examined patterns in the ECAR's messages, hoping to trace the fire's origins. Smoke had been detected in both the lavatory and the avionics bay. The sequence of events was critical. It showed that the fire was not only increasing in intensity, but also spreading through different parts of the aircraft. The last ECAR's warning, recorded before the crash, indicated a serious flight control problem. Everything seemed to point toward the avionics compartment. The bay was packed with wiring, and investigators considered the possibility that an electrical fault had triggered the disaster. The Airbus A320, like many modern jets, operated on a fly-by-wire system, meaning that computers controlled the aircraft's flight surfaces. If power was lost, controlling the plane would become nearly impossible. Some experts believed an avionics bay fire had spread the floor panels, reaching the forward lavatory. This theory bore an unsettling resemblance to the Swissair Flight 111 tragedy, where faulty wiring in an entertainment system had sparked a fire that led to the deaths of 229 people. Could the same deadly sequence have played out on EgyptAir Flight 804? Electrical fires could occur on any aircraft, often originating from a seemingly minor fault. If faulty wiring had ignited a blaze on an A320, the implications were severe. The entire fleet would need to be inspected to prevent another catastrophe. But without cooperation from Egypt's Civil Aviation Ministry, there was no way to confirm the theory. The BEA's investigation ground to a halt due to a lack of access to crucial evidence. A final report was desperately needed. Only by understanding what had happened could aviation safety be improved, preventing similar tragedies in the future. Yet, 6 years after the crash, no official report had been released, and Egypt's criminal investigation remained inconclusive. Then, in March 2022, Leo Burberry finally received the breakthrough he had been chasing for years. Aviation journalist Leo Burberry from Corriere della Sera had traveled to France, where a trusted source provided him with new information regarding the crash of EgyptAir Flight 804. Upon meeting, the source handed him a crucial document, one that offered an alternative explanation for the disaster. From the confidential source, Burberry learned about an ongoing investigation conducted by the French judiciary. A team of highly qualified aviation and accident experts, some of the best in the world, had been assigned to examine all available evidence. The French authorities took this step because there were French citizens among the victims of the flight. Their goal was to determine whether the incident constituted involuntary manslaughter. As Burberry sought to confirm the report, he discovered that investigators had secured copies of the cockpit voice recorder. The recordings contained a key phrase from the pilots: fire. However, they did not specify its location. This single word raised more questions than answers. If there was a fire, how did it start? Investigators analyzed the audio, listening intently for any additional clues. A sense of urgency filled the room as they replayed sections of the recording. Then a breakthrough. Something unusual was detected on Channel 3. Could they isolate it visually? The cockpit voice recorder captured more than just voices. It also recorded ambient noises, which could reveal another layer of the story. Investigators worked meticulously, adjusting the sound spectrum to reduce low frequencies. By doing so, they uncovered a faint but distinct whispering sound. They compared the noise to a database of cockpit sounds, sifting through possibilities. Not this one. Not that one. Then, that's it. The sound was unmistakable, an oxygen mask. The revelation was chilling. If oxygen had been leaking in the cockpit, it could have provided fuel for the fire. In an oxygen-enriched environment, the chances of ignition increase drastically, and once a fire starts, its intensity escalates rapidly. However, while oxygen could sustain a fire, it could not ignite one. This led investigators to their next critical question: what caused the fire in the first place? Searching for patterns, they examined past incidents involving in-flight fires. Had the aviation industry encountered a similar event before? In June 1983, an Air Canada DC-9 suffered a catastrophic onboard fire, forcing an emergency landing. One of the leading theories at the time suggested that a lit cigarette in the lavatory could have been the cause. This prompted a startling possibility. Had the pilots been smoking? While smoking had been banned on most airlines worldwide for years, investigators needed to check EgyptAir's policies. What they discovered was shocking. In 2016, EgyptAir prohibited smoking for passengers, but still allowed it inside the cockpit. The investigation into the crash of Flight 804 took a controversial turn when experts examined the possibility that smoking in the cockpit played a role in the disaster. Despite the absence of an official smoking ban for pilots on EgyptAir, French judicial investigators in 2016 put forward a theory suggesting that the crew's actions may have contributed to the accident. One of the most curious details was the replacement of the cockpit ashtrays just before the crash. The Egyptian Pilots Association and national media firmly denied that the pilots were smokers. However, other pilots interviewed contradicted this, stating that the crew did, in fact, smoke. This conflicting testimony added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Delving deeper into the aircraft's maintenance records, investigators uncovered an even more alarming discovery. 3 days before the crash, the first officer's oxygen mask had been replaced. Not only that, but it appeared to have been left in the emergency setting, a mode that delivers oxygen at higher pressure and increases the risk of combustion if exposed to an ignition source. Experts explained that a mask in this setting could have released a continuous flow of oxygen into the cockpit environment, significantly heightening the danger of fire. Pilots are generally required to check their oxygen masks at the beginning of each day. However, if someone else had already performed this check on the first flight of the day, it might not have been re-examined. This raised serious concerns about whether the mask had been left in an unsafe configuration unnoticed. Egyptian and French investigators speculated that leaking oxygen could have saturated the cockpit air, making it highly flammable. The French report eventually concluded that a cigarette, combined with the leaking oxygen from the first officer's mask, could have sparked a fire. Once ignited, the flames might have spread uncontrollably, leaving the crew unable to respond in time to save the aircraft. However, this theory was met with skepticism. Some aviation experts found it hard to believe that the oxygen mask could have filled the cockpit with enough oxygen to create such a dangerous situation. They argued that even at maximum flow, the oxygen supply was only intended to reach the pilot's face, not flood the entire cockpit. The debate over the true cause of the fire remained unresolved. Despite the speculation, there was no definitive answer regarding what ignited the onboard fire. The Egyptian government continued to maintain that the crash was the result of a terrorist act, while two alternative explanations remained under consideration: the cigarette theory and a potential electrical fault in the aircraft's wiring. Years after the crash, the true cause of Flight 804's demise remained a mystery. What was clear, however, was that whatever happened on that fateful night could happen again. The aviation industry relies on clear answers to prevent future tragedies, making it absolutely crucial to determine what led to the fire on board. In response to the speculation, the Egyptian government ultimately banned smoking in cockpits. However, as of 2022, no official report had been released, leaving many questions unanswered. Investigators and aviation experts strongly believe that more information about Flight 804 had been gathered than had been made public. An incomplete investigation led to an incomplete story, leaving families of the victims without closure. As debates over the cause of the crash continued, the only consensus was that the crisis escalated suddenly, leaving the pilots little time to react. While cruising at 37,000 feet, the first signs of trouble appeared. A fire had broken out. In moments like these, every second counts. The crew would have been trained to act swiftly, but as alarms blared and systems failed one after another, the situation spiraled out of control. Smoke filled the cockpit, making it increasingly difficult to breathe. The pilots, struggling to maintain control, would have followed emergency procedures, but the fire spread too quickly. Despite their efforts, Flight 804 was doomed. The cause of the fire remains one of aviation's enduring mysteries, a chilling reminder that, until all the answers are found, the same risks could threaten future flights. As the smoke in the cockpit thickened, the pilots scrambled to identify its source. They initiated an attempt to isolate the problem, engaging the electrical bus tie auto, a critical procedure designed to manage electrical faults. On the right side of the aircraft, the emergency electrical configuration was activated, a measure that would shut down most of the plane's systems, leaving only the most essential controls needed to guide the aircraft down safely. This was standard protocol in the event of an onboard fire, a well-established safeguard in commercial aviation. However, despite their efforts, the fire seemed to grow. Flames spread rapidly, creeping from the cockpit into the passenger cabin. The situation was deteriorating at an alarming rate. In the confined space of the flight deck, the pilots had access to a fire extinguisher, but it was crucial to determine the fire's exact location, intensity, and progression. Every passing second allowed the flames to inflict more damage, threatening the aircraft's structural integrity and the lives of everyone on board. Inside the cockpit, chaos reigned. Thick smoke obscured visibility, making it increasingly difficult for the pilots to assess the situation. They struggled to fight an enemy they could not see, their efforts hampered by the rapid spread of fire. As panic set in, communication and control became nearly impossible. The cockpit of Flight 804 was likely engulfed in flames as the pilots fought desperately to save their aircraft. The exact steps they took in their final moments remain unknown, one of the many lingering mysteries surrounding this tragic flight. How they attempted to combat the fire, what decisions they made, and what ultimately sealed their fate are questions that remain unanswered. If no one understands what went wrong in an accident, how can future flights be made safer? How can aircraft manufacturers refine their designs? If EgyptAir or Airbus made critical mistakes, those errors have never been publicly acknowledged. Airbus, for its part, has made no modifications to the design of the A320 as a result of this disaster. Years have passed since the tragedy, yet the mystery remains unsolved. Answers continue to elude investigators, leaving behind a void filled with speculation and unanswered questions. The aviation industry owes it to the traveling public, to flight crews, and most importantly, to the victims' families, to uncover the truth. The story of EgyptAir Flight 804 remains one of the most debated mysteries in modern aviation. Two conflicting reports, two different conclusions. But for the families of the 66 victims, one heartbreaking truth: their loved ones never made it home. As investigators continue to search for definitive answers, this tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between technology, human oversight, and the unpredictable forces of the skies. Thank you for watching and taking this journey with us. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into aviation mysteries. We always strive to bring you the most accurate and compelling stories, but if we missed any details or if you have thoughts on this case, let us know in the comments below. Your insights and feedback help us improve. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and fly safe.